Well, this is Dr. Stan back here at Radio Liberty, coming to you from the hills overlooking beautiful and picturesque Monterey Bay and bringing you the news behind the news, the story behind the story, hoping to convince you that reality is usually scoffed at. Illusion is usually king. But in the battle for survival of Western civilization, it's going to be reality, not illusion or delusion, that'll determine what the future will bring. And I have to remind you the views that are expressed here are not necessarily those of the owners, management, staff, sponsors, or supporters of the station you're listening to. They happen to be my views, and, well, for the next hour, they're going to be the views of Bob Fletcher. And Bob's a good friend who's done a lot of great research. We carry a number of his DVDs and videos. He has an excellent one on UFOs. He's got one on going to the background of the murder of John Fitzgerald Kennedy. He's got one on weather modification. Certainly, he's got one on the strange death of Sonny Bono. And Bob, how are you doing tonight?
I'm all right, so to speak, I guess. As good as can be expected. It's good to be here, though.
Well, it's always good to have you, and certainly Bob's done a lot of fundamental research, and of course, we're fortunate to have him. He's done a lot of investigation. He's testified before various committees of Congress and the various bodies of Congress, and so. But we thought maybe tonight we'd talk about the murder of John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Now, why was he murdered? Why did Lee Harvey Oswald murder him? And then why did Jack Ruby murder Lee Harvey Oswald? And they've never tried to get to the bottom of this. They appointed a commission, the Warren Commission. 3 of the 7 members of the Warren Commission were Masons. 4 of the members of the Warren Commission actually came from the Council on Foreign Relations. They weren't going to give us an opportunity to find out what really happened. Of course, J. Edgar Hoover had to cover up what was going on because he was deeply involved in this. His job was to not reveal what happened, but to conceal what happened, and the same with the Central Intelligence Agency. They could never let the American people know the truth about what happened, and so they told us, Jack Ruby, of course, didn't know Lee Harvey Oswald. There was no relationship between them, but Jack Ruby, he saw a sign. And it said, it was put up by the John Birch Society. It said, impeach Earl Warren. And he was so upset by that sign, he decided to kill Lee Harvey Oswald, or he wanted to kill Lee Harvey Oswald because he didn't want Jackie Kennedy to have to go through the tragedy of a trial for Lee Harvey Oswald. And if you believe any of these stories, you've got to be incredibly naive. Well, recently, of course, there's been some information that's come up simply within the last week or so. Evidence that Lee Harvey Oswald and Jack Ruby knew one another. They knew one another very well. It appeared in the media one day and then suddenly never to be heard of again. Pick up the story there, Bob.
Yeah, of course, that's amazing. That's part of the real problem we have, and that is, which of course you speak about all the time, and that is the unbelievable media control. And there's a lot of ways that can be done, and we won't have to not going to get into that this evening, but believe it or not, to the listeners, by placing people at certain positions, the media actually can be not only controlled, but isolated. And I will get into it just a little bit, and that is to mention that a very close friend of mine for several years, and I believe she's passed on at this point in time, but she actually worked for Bill Casey, who was the head of the CIA, and had been involved at the White House through a couple of presidential administrations. And, of course, she knew an awful lot about an awful lot. And she had told me one time, I actually asked her, how in the world something can go on in Los Angeles and not show up in the news on the East Coast the same as it does in Los Angeles. How does that happen, and how could they possibly do that? Because I was skeptical as to how that might possibly happen. I just don't know how. I couldn't figure it out. And she told me that basically the CIA had placed people at high levels in the United Press, International, and Associated Press.
Hold that thought. We'll be back in just a moment.
Sure.
Go right ahead, Bob.
And she had said that, in fact, they had placed let's say at the executive and management level, let's say the editorial level of some of or all of the biggest news media in the United States, and it had taken them like 20 years to get all of the people in line and get everything in a manageable condition. And what they can do actually is something can take place in Los Angeles, for example, and it's up to single person or two or three people whether that goes on the line and gets out and becomes national news. And it is more, at this point in time, it's actually a computer button. They either press a button and puts it on out there, or they press it for limited exposure, or they can press the button and have it not show up at all. So what had happened over many years, they've slowly infiltrated at the management level of the news media. So you actually do have, or it is set up now in the country that if there's something that they want to curtail, they can do it. And if they want to make it a big deal, and maybe it's a stupid little story as a diversion, they certainly can put that out too. And that kind of answered the question as to how in the world this kind of a thing could take place, because I couldn't figure it out. And she simply said at the highest level of the international press desks and the editorial desks, they're able to just either say yes or no, whether a story gets out and goes every place. So what we had, which you mentioned here about 10 days ago, the Dallas, Texas County District Attorney released about 15 boxes of documents, and then miscellaneous items, that a couple of which belong to some to Lee Harvey Oswald, some that belong to Jack Ruby, etc. And what was most important was a couple of transcripts that seemed to show the connection of Oswald to Ruby, and they were actually said to have been discussing the potential assassination of John F. Kennedy prior to the event taking place. And now they made a big deal of this for about one day, and of course, and then, as you indicated, it just disappeared. But the material that we had come across, myself and my staff.
I'm going to have to ask you to hold that thought. We'll be back in just a moment with Bob Fletcher. Well, this is Dr. Stan, and certainly Bob was saying that the way that they are able to control the media here in this country is that the CIA has people planted in the major news services, AP, UP, other wire services, and probably in many of the major places where the information gets out. Now, certainly, where can you verify that? Well, if you want to, there's a wonderful book. It's called Fixing Intelligence. It's written by Lieutenant General William Odom. That's Lieutenant General William Odom, and he, for many years, was in charge of the most secret of all the secret organizations in America, even far more secret than the CIA. The NSA, sometimes referred to as the No Such Agency, but actually the National Security Administration. And William Odom is in charge of that. Now, he's a good patriot, but he signed all sorts of secrecy agreements, so he can't come out and tell you what they're doing. But in this book, he does ask questions like, should the CIA be assassinating people? Should the CIA have their agents planted in the media? Should the CIA have their agents planted in the media, which is exactly what Bob Fletcher is saying. And of course, Bob was recently mentioning that just within the last week or so, why the district attorney there and or somebody working in Dallas had released a number of boxes of material they had going back to the time of the Kennedy assassination. And there were some transcripts there, supposedly, where Lee Harvey Oswald and Jack Ruby were talking about the assassination of President Kennedy. I can't help but wonder if maybe some of these transcripts were there to deceive us, because I do not believe that for 1 minute that Lee Harvey Oswald killed the President of the United States. But you pick up this story and let's hear what you have to say about it.
Sure. Well, we had a couple of years back, I'd gotten a video and also some other information. But the video was Zapruder's tape, the old one that we've seen a million times. But it was sent to me through an intelligence agent, and at that time that I had gotten it, actually many years ago, the time that I had received it, it was had been run through a rather advanced computerization that the intelligence community had, and of course it showed almost. I mean, you could almost see the bullet in the air, kind of a thing. It was very, it was inch by inch, frame by frame, kind of a thing. That nowadays, of course, anybody can do that with a good computer. But back when I first got this, which I believe was in '88 or '89, it was pretty much special kind of equipment. So the video that I had gotten, and along with a few other bits and pieces, it was things that nobody else had ever seen, and I almost felt compelled to go ahead and do a full video report on what I had. So I went in through other contacts, including agents and what have you, and spending a tremendous amount of time with going through a specialized video log, video depositories, and old news footage, as well as other bits and pieces. We put together our report, and and some of it fits completely into the brand new this material just released from the Dallas Police Department. And what do I mean by that? Well, I located, for example, several, 2 or 3 women. One that had worked in Oswald's bar, or 2 that had worked in one of his the Carousel Lounge.
No, is that Oswald or Ruby?
I'm sorry. Yes, I'm referring to Ruby.
Right.
That's right. I'm referring to Ruby, and a couple of the women that actually worked for Ruby in his Carousel Lounge, and that they had actually sat at the table and handed drinks and had participated even in part of the conversation between Oswald and Ruby prior to the murder of Kennedy, and they were talking about shooting Kennedy. And they were, right, so to speak, out in public, at least doing it to themselves secretively, but it was in Jack Ruby's Carousel Lounge. So they had been put together by these people, 2 or 3 people that had come forward several years ago, and I had that on video. And then you had Jack Ruby's bizarre connection to Richard Nixon. And Richard Nixon, apparently, when he was many years ago, and I believe it was 47, that's going way back, or in the 50s, when Nixon was still a district attorney and a prosecuting attorney, I believe in the state of Pennsylvania, may have been up around Chicago, I'm not sure, but I'm thinking it's Pennsylvania. But Ruby was actually working on the side for him as a mob informant, working for Richard Nixon. And of course, you get say, "Wow, gee, that's pretty amazing," but that's not a big deal. But what is a big deal that, in fact, Nixon stepped in between congressional investigations and Jack Ruby, and his name was Rubenstein at that time. And Rubenstein was pulled out of the committee so that he was not obligated to testify in public. And what had happened was Nixon said to the committee behind closed doors, "Listen, this guy's been working for me. He's been good for me for a long time. He's connected to the mob. He's been blowing the whistle under the table, supplying us as a stool pigeon information. So leave him alone. I want to get him out of town, get him disappeared." And that was the extent of it. But they had that close a connection. Now, I'm going to draw the importance of that later on, is the fact that so Ruby now moves down to the New Orleans area, sets up a mob-connected, mob-associated nightclub. So they kind of controlled all of them along the Strip at that time anyhow. And he set up this club down there. Now, much later on, we have one of, in which we get into much more detail on this that I won't do right now, but in our reports we cover it, a fellow named Frank Sturgis. Frank Sturgis was a hitman for the CIA and generally a kind of a hired gun, so to speak. And he was one of the guys that also worked for Richard Nixon and was arrested and did time as one of the burglars at the Watergate break-in that was such a big deal that actually ended up bringing down Richard Nixon from the presidency.
But that was long after the Kennedy assassination.
This was long after. Well, now the point of bringing this up is that Frank Sturgis was also arrested as one of the hobos at the scene of the assassination.
You're talking about he was one of the hobos on the grassy
that
hill.
They arrested. Right. Actually, they arrested in up on the top of near where the railroad cars were, and that was fairly close to the grassy knoll.
Right.
Along with E. Howard Hunt and a few other scurrilous characters of the CIA assassin team. By the way, they had an assassin team, 2 or 3 teams that had gone around the world on the behalf of the national security and the CIA, and of course had carried out a variety of assassinations worldwide, different dignitaries and people like that. But to get back to this, see, there's a strange link here with Nixon. I also discovered that Richard Nixon and Vice President Johnson, the day before the assassination, secretly met on a ranch in Texas, and they met with E. Howard Hunt and a few other people that of CIA assassination backgrounds. They met on a ranch. Now, along with that, there was a public meeting, not public, but somewhat public. There was a meeting of Pepsi-Cola bottlers in Texas there at that same day, or the day before the assassination, and Nixon and Johnson were involved with that, and other people at that public meeting. So, and of course, people always say, well, you can't prove that. Well, yes, I can prove it, because I was able to discover actual live newsreel footage where the announcer shows their arrival into Dallas the day before the murder and has Johnson and Nixon on the newsreel, and they discuss it. All right? So when the people come back and say, well, you can't prove it, and Richard Nixon always said, if you can believe this, Nixon said he didn't remember where he was when Kennedy was murdered. Well, where he was Dallas, Texas. And it's absolutely proven. We have the footage, and we have that on our investigation that we did several years ago.
Now, is that all on the footage of the videos that we
It's all on the video that we have on the Kennedy assassination. Right. What we also put on our DVD, now it's available on DVD, what we also were able to put on there, it was a couple of amazing discoveries. I have live film footage of Jack Ruby talking after he was captured, after he was grabbed up, and he was in jail for a couple of days after the Oswald murder. Ruby actually discussing one thing that right out of his mouth, and this is on live video, or at that time was actually a film, on live news film footage. He was discussing the New World Order, which blew me right off of my chair when I saw that, because what he says is the America has to be aware there will be a brand new form of government will be put upon the Americans in the future, and its murder of Kennedy was part of it. And we actually have that on video also.
Well, there's some video down there at the where in Dallas, where the special area that they have where they talk about these things, where they have Jack Ruby talking to the members of the Warren Commission, saying, "Get me out of here, and I'll tell you the real truth. Get me out of here, and I'll tell you the real truth."
Right, and the footage that we have actually was taken loosely. This was not at the committee.
Hold on, we'll be right back.
Sure.
All right, go right ahead, Bob.
This particular footage was taken, as a matter of fact, in the jail, and while he was being transported, like from one cell to another, where he was mumbling these things out to the reporters, and it was caught, live. It was not something that was formal meeting at all. He was actually shooting off his mouth, and he said that also that the murder went all the way up to the very highest levels of our own government.
He actually made that statement there.
That's live on our tape. It certainly is. And then also we were able to discover what might appear to be a simple, non-important point on the one hand, but it actually is, in the last 45 years, it is the only proof, absolute proof, that it was more than one shooter, therefore it was a conspiracy, and that is the discovery of 2 bullet holes in the windshield of the limousine. So what we have is one bullet hit on the very top stainless steel frame of the open vehicle, actually the front windshield frame. One bullet hit there. That would have come from the back of the vehicle, from behind the vehicle. Another one, which I believe came from the front, hits the windshield and does like a spider web shattering, because you have to remember it would have been bulletproof glass on the windshield, even though they had the top off. Obviously, the bulletproof glass doesn't help you when you got the top off of the limo. But he had 2 bullets in the windshield. That other bullet, if it came from the front, which is what I expect, the bullet from the front would have come from the railroad overpass, because that's where it would have been aimed directly to get a shot from someplace up on the railroad. Now, what we also have, and I don't have it on my particular report because I didn't get my hands onto it until later on, but what I do have is a lady named Maria Lorenz. Now, she is on my DVD, stating, in fact, that Frank Sturgis had told her that he had been involved with the murder. Now, Frank Sturgis also admitted it to a whole variety of people on his deathbed. About 10 years ago, he died at the age of 75. And one of the last things he said was his admission that he was involved with killing Kennedy. Now, this Maria Lorenz was a female Central Intelligence agent. She was a girlfriend of Frank Sturgis. Again, that's the guy connected to Nixon. And she was a girlfriend. He said to her, after the murder, he said, "We killed Kennedy." And she actually had flown or driven up from Miami to New Orleans, or to Dallas. I believe she went through New Orleans and then into Dallas from Miami, and had brought the weapons up and supplied them, dropped the rifles, a handful of special rifles, 2 or 3, whatever they were, and dropped them off to Frank Sturgis in Dallas. And she was, later on, she said, "You mean that that's what those weapons were for, the ones that I brought to you?" And he said, "Yes." And she actually also, she was a CI agent. And interesting as a sidebar, this lady, Maria Lorenz, had been sent down and was Fidel Castro's girlfriend for a while.
Hold that thought. We'll be right back here in just a moment with Bob Fletcher. Well, this is Dr. Stan, and Bob's got an awful lot of great information. A lot of this is on the DVD that we carry, a video that we carry on the Kennedy assassination that he put out, and talking about a woman named Maria Lorenzo, who had come forward now and admitted that Frank Sturgis, the day after the Kennedy assassination, Frank Sturgis, a member working for the CIA, close to Nixon, had said, we killed Kennedy, and she'd even brought the weapons up. She didn't know she was bringing up the weapons that were going to be used to kill the president, but she'd brought the weapons up from Florida and given them to Frank Sturgis. So, and then of course she was also a very attractive woman. Apparently the CIA had sent her down to get close to Fidel Castro. You pick up the story there, Bob.
Right, and again, it's just an interesting sidebar, but this shows you how I must use the term heavily important this particular lady was. And she was not just some barfly, let's say, shooting off her mouth. She actually had been sent down, had befriended Fidel Castro many years ago, and she was one that had attempted to carry out one of the Central Intelligence assassinations of Castro, which they're always talking about. They're always talking about how many times they tried to bump him off, over his 50 years as a dictator, and I guess they eventually just gave up because he was also, not only was he reasonably sharp, I guess, in terms of being aware of things, he also is the luckiest guy in the world because in the story that Maria Lorenz talks about, she had put cyanide in the toothpaste tube. She had a toothpaste tube supplied, I said that incorrectly, it was actually supplied to her by the CI, of course, and it had cyanide in it. Had Fidel Castro brushed his teeth with it, it would have been the end of him. And she had the ability. She slipped it in, put it into his the cabinet in his bathroom, and replaced the other toothpaste tube with the poison one. Castro picked it up, was wandering around with a toothbrush in one hand, the toothpaste tube in the other, and he dropped it before using it. He dropped it, and when he dropped it on the floor, he stepped on it. And it accidentally, of course, shot all of the toothpaste out of the tube. He picked it up, of course, and threw it in the trash and went and got another tube of toothpaste.
Because you can't help but wonder if maybe he knew what was in that.
Well, and of course you don't know. But like I say, he either one of two things, because we tried many other operations to remove him, and through the CI and probably a couple other agencies. But the bottom line was, and apparently I believe actually Miss Maria Lorenz was actually there, and witnessed it, that in fact he just dropped it and stepped on it while walking across the bathroom or the bedroom or whatever, and fortunately for him, he was, like I say, the luckiest dictator in the world. He's still down there, so I guess he certainly must be fortunate.
I wonder how if you stop and think of it, though, Bob, ordinarily if you drop something, you don't then step on it.
Well, he was walking. See, I mean, this was who knows? This is the story. It's possible that he figured it out or knew. I don't think so because he never did anything towards Maria, and he would have known. Would have had to have been her that put it in there. That's, I think, the point. That he never said anything. He just he just walking with it in one hand while he was walking. He dropped it, and the next foot down before he got a chance, stepped on the darn thing, and he threw it in the trash, and that was the end of it. But I don't think he knew, I guess is what I'm saying, because this Maria Lorenz would have been in serious trouble, and apparently he didn't even react. He just threw it in the trash. And
all right, go ahead. We'll go ahead with this.
Anyhow, but we do have statements of her live that she did several years ago. We have those on our DVD and our expose, and I have to also say that I'm pretty sure that we were able to track down the person who was on the grassy knoll, and I'm just about positive that it was a fellow named Roscoe White. Roscoe White, as a matter of fact, was actually connected also to Oswald in the Marines. Originally, he was involved with something to do with Oswald, and he was, I believe, the guy up on the little knoll there. Everybody called him Badge Man, or he looked like he was dressed in some kind of a uniform. And Roscoe White was, in fact, a uniformed police officer placed on the Dallas police force ahead of time to carry out the assassination.
All right, we're going to be back here in just a moment with Bob Fletcher going into his research on the Kennedy assassination. Ladies and gentlemen, there are a lot of stories out there, but one thing is sure, and that is, of course, we haven't been told that our guest this evening, Bob Fletcher, who's really done a lot of personal investigating and then put together a fascinating video. Now, we have his other videos, the one on UFOs, the one on weather modification. We think those are so important, and now we're talking about, of course, is a DVD or video on the Kennedy assassination. So pick the story up, Bob.
Well, and unfortunately, of course, Stan, we're never going to get a clear picture. It's all over. It's been too long now, so we're never going to get that final clear picture of who did what and when. But it's important that people that people understand the interfacing and the interconnections between characters that were absolutely involved with this in one way or another, and it's mind-boggling. You can't even. It's so convoluted in terms of the connections between people that if you try to write it out, draw it on a piece of paper, and like into a graph or a chart or something, you just couldn't do it. It would just look like a giant spider web of connecting lines. But this fella, Roscoe White, was in naval intelligence. He had been involved, like I say, I believe he was in the Marines originally with Oswald, or excuse me, yes, with Oswald. And off the top of my head, I can't give you the exact. I don't know if he was in boot camp or what, but there was a direct connection between the two. He had been placed on the Dallas police force in advance there. And what had happened was his son, many years after, 10 years, 15 years after Kennedy's assassination, Roscoe White died in some strange industrial fire. And when I say strange, it was one of these fires where the people that were caught in this fire, and Roscoe White was one, was totally just burned to a total crisp. You know, it's something you couldn't identify with anything. I mean, they wouldn't even have been able to gotten DNA out of what was left. And so it's one of those questions of maybe it was him and maybe it wasn't. But accordingly, his son had gone and found in his left property after his death, he had found a footlocker filled with a bunch of stuff, which included a complete diary of Roscoe White explaining who he had killed and what he had done on the behalf of the agency. It showed that not only that he admitted being the guy on the grassy knoll.
Hold that thought. We're going to be back here in just a moment. Well, this is Dr. Stan, and of course, Bob is telling us that when Roscoe White died in a rather unusual fire some years later, his son then went to his materials in a footlocker. He found a diary where Roscoe White had listed all of the men he'd killed while working for the Central Intelligence Agency. And pick up the story. What did he say about the murder of Kennedy?
Well, and he included in this, as a matter of fact, many of those strange witnesses that were killed or murdered or had accidents. There was like 120 connected witnesses that died, after the assassination. He actually named 5 or 10 of these that he was involved in killing. That was included in the diary. And then also included in the diary was some top-secret communiques in sort of a coded language, but instructing him to stay there until the time was right, not to quit the Dallas police force until they gave him the high sign, and to stay in there, et cetera, et cetera. Now, those particular pieces of paper communiques we have also shown live on our DVD, so that a person could actually read this paperwork yourself. But this is what places him on the police force, and et cetera.
Do you have who has the diary?
Diary, of course, this is one of these things that you right away you realize was a mistake. But the son, of course, not knowing A from B, being an average guy, not knowing any of the intricacies of this thing, he took the diary to the FBI. Okay, so I know what you're saying in your mind right away, and anybody that's that's sharp enough realizes right away. You go, oh no, anyhow, he passed this on to the FBI, thinking he was doing the right thing. And of course, at this point in time, Puff the Magic Dragon, that diary has vanished. And so it's gone. I'll never see that again. And it was, like I say, he physically took it into the FBI, figured he was doing the right thing, and of course it's gone.
No, of course, would that be the FBI archives or the National Archives?
No, it's just gone. It's gone. It vanished, is what I'm saying. He took it to the local agency, probably in, I'm going to guess in Dallas, but he took it to some FBI agent, probably wherever it was that this Roscoe White's home was, and I don't remember. I think it was in Texas someplace. But nonetheless, the point is, he hand carried it to the FBI, took it into an agent. They gave him a receipt for it, I guess, and or maybe they didn't. I don't even know about that. But the bottom line was, he never saw it again. Of course, they told him they would get it back to him when they were done copying it, and it's a stupidest thing the guy ever did, and he realizes it. But the bottom line is that diary is gone. But these interesting little communications weren't. He kept those, and we do have those included on the report. But here's another, again, one of these sidebars. This Roscoe White, not only being connected with Oswald and being a sniper involved with one of the military hit teams, he also, his wife was a dancer in Ruby's Club in New Orleans, or in Texas, one or the other. So, again, it's this convoluted mixture of characters here, where they're all interfaced together in one manner or another. Every time you find a guy over here on the right hand that was involved with it, you look back, you'll find out that he's totally connected to Oswald or to Ruby or to one person or another there. I'm pretty positive, according to other investigations that have been done, I'm dead positive that Barry Seal, the infamous intelligence agent / drug smuggler that dealt out of that worked so easily under Bill Clinton's governorship in Arkansas, smuggling the drugs by the billions of dollars, that he actually flew a small plane out of the Dallas airport there, and actually apparently probably was the getaway plane for at least a couple of the people that were involved with the shooter team.
In fact, we even have a book on Barry Seal called Barry and the Boys. He was a CIA operative tied into George Herbert Walker Bush, and made literally hundreds of millions of dollars smuggling drugs, and didn't do him any good. They set him up to be assassinated, and he was assassinated.
Yeah, one of the
he knew too much,
and directly connected with George Bush, so connected to George Bush that when he was machine gunned to death in New Orleans in the front seat of his Cadillac by some hit team from someplace, George Bush's private telephone number was in the business card in his pocket.
Now, that was George Herbert Walker Bush, not
yes,
the president.
Yes, it's George
Bush number one.
George
right?
Bush Sr., right, number 41, President 41.
But remember, of course, he'd come from the CIA. He'd been the director of the Central Intelligence Agency, and just as in Russia, usually, of course, your dictator comes from the KGB. So in the United States, our president came from the Central Intelligence Agency, the counterpart of the KGB.
Absolutely, yes. He, as a matter of fact, he was involved. Obviously, I'm pretty positive he was an agent at a fairly high level himself, which he's always denied being an agent prior to getting involved as the director. He denied being an on-the-ground agent earlier, but he was involved with putting together the three ships that were masquerading, that were part of the invasion for the Bay of Pigs. And he was directly involved with that, because the three ships, one was named Houston, and one was named Barbara, and one was named Zapata.
Right, because Zapata was his oil company.
Right, and he still, even with the names of those three ships, he was still denying that he was an agent during that period of time. And of course, that was way back in 1960 and 61, when the failed Bay of Pigs took place. But again, it's interesting. They, like they say, just this last week they bring up this new miscellaneous information, and they tried to the connection again between Jack Ruby, and Lee Harvey Oswald, indicated on papers that they just brought to the surface, and we have several different connecting points in the DVD that we finished on the Kennedy assassination. That, for the most part, I would say goes hand in hand with the new material that's come out. Even though, with this new material, instantly you had people that were saying, "Oh well, even though we just discovered this and it's very clear and all this, it looks like actually notes relative to a meeting, or possibly a transcript of a audio recording is what it might have been. Actually, somebody may have been recording, may have been Ruby himself recording the meetings." But nonetheless, you have people that came out the day after that material was exposed a few weeks ago, and they said, "Oh, that was probably baloney. That's probably just some information because some guy was going to write a movie and all of that." So they poo-pooed the information. I did not see anybody get in touch with me and say, "Hey, how does that connect with all the stuff that you've got and that you discovered a couple years ago?" If they had done that, it certainly would have turned it into a different atmosphere as to how good this new material might be. But as far as I'm concerned, there's no question that Oswald and Jack Ruby knew each other, and it appears that it was literally a mob-connected obligation for Ruby to kill Oswald. And then how that works, etc., I don't know. You have to really get into the mindset of the people involved, and potentially there were mobsters involved with this.
Well, of course, really, there's a book called Double Cross, was written by Chuck Giancano, the brother of Sam Giancano, who was the godfather of the mafia at that time, and basically Chuck Giancano said the reason that Jack Ruby killed Oswald is he was ordered to.
Right.
He was told if he didn't, he would be tortured to death, and everybody in his family would be tortured to death. And when you get an offer like that from the head of the mafia, it's an offer you can't refuse, an order
right.
you can't refuse.
And I absolutely believe that. I think that's exactly the mindset. It's a little hard for the average person to perceive that, but in my lifetime and the variety of things that I've done and the investigations I've carried out, I have known mobsters. I have met mobsters, and I understand the mindset a little better than someone that maybe never did, had never had that experience. And that is absolutely no question that it is the mindset of a deeply planted person in the mob. If they are ordered to do it, they do it regardless of the ramifications.
And of course, if anybody who wants to check this story, it comes from a book called Double Cross by Chuck Giancano. We used to carry it, but it's out of print now. We don't have it anymore.
And by the way, that book also goes deeply into the Barry Seal drug smuggling business as well, if I'm not mistaken. And I'm thinking it's the same book. Very good, extremely interesting. Barry Seal, by the way, something that I also got my hands on many years ago, which by itself doesn't mean anything, but when you put it together with other things, during the Iran-Contra mess, which, by the way, I was a federal witness in that case, and another case directly related with the Iran-Contra business. I was a witness in that case, and
No, wasn't that how you got all involved in this?
That was
Basically,
how
somebody bought up
That's
your
right.
your
That's
company.
how I originally got into this whole mess, and that's way back in 1987.
They were
Um,
using your business as a front for this whole
right.
Iran counter business.
That's correct. And so I was a victim first, and then a witness, and then an investigator. But to get back to what I was going to say, oh gosh, what was I talking about?
You were talking about Iran Contra.
Well, oh yes, okay, excuse me, Barry Seal and the Iran Contra. Barry Seal, they had the CI had machine gun pistols, fully automatic machine gun pistols, specially manufactured for themselves by a company called Parkometer. Or let me put it this way: they manufactured some of the mechanism for machine gun pistols for the Iran Contra use. It was done through Oliver North, obviously, and Barry Seal. Though here we have this multi-million-dollar, actually may even have been to the billions, drug smuggler functioning out of Arkansas, and companies there manufacturing machine guns for the CIA or whomever you want to call it, whatever agency it was at that time, for the Contra use, full automatic pistols, and a guy that's a drug smuggler goes in, and he's the guy that made the order. He dropped off the order to the company, he dropped off the drawings and the sketches, and put together the contract on the behalf of the CIA, and when he came back, he picked up the parts. These are machine gun parts, right? He picks up the machine gun parts made in Arkansas and gives the purchase order from the Central Intelligence Agency to pay for the parts. And actually, so here my point obviously being here, you have one of the biggest infamous drug smugglers in the United States hand carrying in the purchase order to pick up the machine guns at their machine gun parts at the company in Arkansas.
Of course, I think one of the most interesting things is, of course, Barry Seal, who was obviously working with or for the CIA, was this drug smuggler. And of course,
he was a CIA agent. I think he was an agent first, as a matter of fact, because it goes way back to. I have information on him going way back to when he was, matter of fact, in the Civil Air Patrol as a teenager in New Orleans, and guess what? Alongside of Oswald.
They were both, of course, in the Civil Air Patrol.
They were in the Civil Air Patrol together. Again, this is where we get back to that convoluted little mixture. It's the same guys. You had 10 or 15 people. You draw a circle around their names, and they'll be on every single page of the book. And over a period of 30 years, carrying out covert operations, which also are many of them criminal or directly overlapping with the most flagrant criminal activities in the history of America, and they were intelligence agents, a whole bunch of them.
Wasn't Ferry a part of that as well?
Excuse me?
Ferry, there's a fellow named
Yes,
Ferry.
absolutely. A fellow named Ferry, who was a strange little character, and in the Oliver Stone motion picture of JFK, he probably was the most standout character. Was played by Joe Pesci, and it was this tiny little fellow. He had a strange disease where he had no hair on his body.
Right. No eyebrows.
Right. So he had no hair at all, any place on his body, none on his arms or his legs. Did not have any hair on his head. Had no eyebrows. He used to paint on his eyebrows, like with a eyebrow pencil, like some kind of a whatever, and had like a 29-cent hairpiece. He said it was the most ridiculous thing. It looked like people that knew him said it was like a piece of a carpet that he used to wear on his head. He used to fall off all the time in the middle of a conversation, and he was really a strange one. And he also was actually the recruiter for the intelligence agency at the Civil Air Patrol, and that's where Oswald was there, and Barry Seal, and they all started very early. And see, Oswald was a CIA agent. There's no question in my mind. That's why he went to Russia, and By the way, he worked on the U-2 aircraft in Turkey just prior to going on to Russia. So he was, I mean, people could say, oh, that jerk or that whatever. I mean, the guy spoke some Russian. I don't know how much, but he spoke enough. He married a Russian, the niece of a KGB agent, and which, of course, we got to meet her later on.
And of course, our government paid his way back from Russia after he defected there. And
oh, absolutely.
I mean, of course, the thing is, the story is just so full of holes that people have to understand that this whole thing was a setup. And of course, he was, I think for years they were preparing him as a patsy for the assassination.
Or for something, anyhow,
right,
yes.
Then passing out tracts for the Fair Play for Cuba committee there in New Orleans. And well, anyway, we're just about out of time. Our guest has been Bob Fletcher. And of course, we've been talking about the Kennedy assassination. The DVD or the video, very informative, one of the best things that's ever been made. And the reason you haven't heard of it was, well, maybe you're not supposed to. We'll be back in just a moment to wrap up tonight's program. Well, Bob, you got 3 minutes to wrap up the program.
Well, again, this is kind of an old story we've been going over today, but a lot of new material. If people have that lingering interest and you haven't seen the DVD, I suggest they contact you and get a copy, or if you would like to contact me, drop me a note relative to any of the materials we have, and that's Post Office Box 216, Bayview, Idaho, 83803. That's Bob Fletcher, Box 216, Bayview, Idaho, 83803. And sign off with one thing, I guess. Don't believe hardly anything that you hear, and then the rest of it you got to investigate.
Well, I think we're lucky to have people like Bob, who's been on the front lines of this and really knew a lot of the key people. In fact, he had talked to Sonny Bono about some of these things, and Sonny was going to launch open an investigation just before he went on a skiing trip. And of course, you remember the strange death of Sonny Bono. It was the second key government official to die in a skiing accident by running into a tree within a couple of weeks. And
1 week.
1 week. And of course,
5 days, 7 days.
And of course, the people who knew Sonny knew that he didn't run into a tree. This was simply a means of eliminating him. And anybody in Congress who really wants to get to the bottom of what's going on, their life is in jeopardy, which is why most of them, the smart ones, really don't do much of anything but get up and posture and jump up and down and profess this and profess that. And
pick up their paycheck.
And pick up their paycheck. Because, of course, if you take a stand, you will either be arrested on trumped-up charge, or you'll be simply eliminated. Unfortunately, that's what happened to Sonny Bono. And Bob, do you have any video on that at all?
Well, no. I'll tell you what. We're literally in the middle of it to complete it, and I'm finishing a major investigation, real in depth on it. We will have that finished, and in a couple of weeks, I believe we may have a major magazine doing a story, at least on the surface, a good story on my Sonny Bono material. We're working on that right now. I'm talking, a national magazine with about 15 million, 20 million readers. So I'll let you know as that works. But we're working on the DVD. We will have a report finished, and it's kind of upsetting, but nobody's paid attention.
And because, ladies and gentlemen, we do carry a number of Bob's DVDs. We carry the one on weather modification. We carry the one on certainly on the assassination of President Kennedy, and certainly one of my favorites, of course, this is one on the UFOs. But Bob, God bless. We'll talk to you real soon. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Well, this is Dr. Stan, and we're so fortunate to have access to people like Bob Fletcher, who's really been an investigative reporter since he was dragged into the Iran-Contra mess when somebody bought up his company, and then instead of manufacturing the toys they were supposed to, they were using it for smuggling things out of the country, the whole Iran-Contra, and he got dragged into that, and he's been investigating things ever since. And we carry his excellent DVD or video on weather modification, certainly on the Kennedy assassination, And then, of course, his analysis of UFOs. Of course, I would disagree with a little bit. His information is great. The conclusion we come to would be slightly different, but I think you need to see it. You'll see some wonderful pictures of UFOs, and you'll see interviews with all sorts of people and material you'll never see elsewhere. Bob does a great job. If you'd like more information or the suggested gift for any of these products, give us a call at 1-800-544-8927. 1-800-544-8927. If you're interested in weather modification, we have a great book on that, weather modification, and then we have, of course, my 4-tape set on, or CD set, either tape or CD, on weather modification, and then, of course, we have a couple of 4-tape sets on chemtrails. We have a 4-tape set on HARP, the High Altitude Auroral Research Project, and then, of course, we have a book, HARP, the Ultimate Weapon. HARP, the Ultimate Weapon. And you know, of course, that they've had ice storms and snow in Baghdad. Haven't had that in 50 years. We're having some of the coldest weather we've ever had, and yet they're trying to convince us there's global warming. And, you know, people have to understand they know how to modify the weather. And, of course, if you wanted to create famine throughout the world, what a wonderful way to do it, other than to create droughts. And they know how to create droughts. How can I say that? Well, because, of course, Zbigniew Brzezinski said they would be able to create storms and droughts. In the book called Between Two Ages, which he wrote back in 1970, he talks about how in the future they're going to be able to create storms and droughts and all sorts of new diseases. Storms and droughts and all sorts of new disabling diseases, and now we have them. They call them chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, Lyme disease, chronic chlamydia infections, chronic brucellosis infections, and all of these are genetically modified. We have AIDS, and of course AIDS is a chronic disease that's lethal, but this is a genetically modified mycoplasma, and of course the HIV virus is a genetically modified virus. It's a variant of the Vision sheep virus, and we have, of course, the original secret records of the CIA special project was called the Special Virus Cancer Project. They tried to destroy all the copies. Fortunately, they didn't do a very good job of that, and those copies, either we have, or you can get them from Don Scott. That's certainly one of our regular guests here at Radio Liberty. In fact, we'll have to have Don back on again. And what most people don't understand is that AIDS is a combination of two diseases. One is HIV, the other is a genetically modified mycoplasm, the same one that you find in much of Gulf War illness. So understand, ladies and gentlemen, we're up against organized evil. When you understand that, things really do begin to make sense. That's why you need to get my book, Brotherhood of Darkness. That's Brotherhood of Darkness, the book or the CD, and then we suggest my more recent talk, The Forbidden Secret, the 4-tape or 4-CD set, The Supernatural, and the book that goes with that, written by Johanna Michelson, who was a medium, who was deeply involved in the occult, although she saw some of the most miraculous things. And then suddenly she realized this was all demonic. That's the beautiful side of evil, and of course my interviews with her, or at least a couple of them, in the 4-tape or 4-CD set, The Supernatural. Understand we truly are involved in the spiritual